Not only am I going to show you how to play every hero in Overwatch, but I'm also going to reveal some of the best tips and tricks along the way, and what better hero to start off than D.Va. D.Va has 3 main playstyles centered around controlling or dishing out aggression, either mark, dive, or peel. Look to mark lethal DPS in aggressive positions like Sojourn, Soldier, Echo, Cassidy, or Ashe. Look to dive for isolated, squishy targets like Zen, Bap, Widow, or Hanzo, or look to peel your own backline against heroes like Tracer, Genji, Doomfist, and Winston. Remember that target priority here is key, and it mainly comes down to what targets are easiest to kill and which ones are the most dangerous or aggressive. Doomfist is also a powerful tank in the right hands. With Doomfist, either disrupt or destroy. Disrupt the enemy team if they're running a short range, bulky brawl comp. You do this by getting juicy seismic slams and diverting a lot of attention with your power block and punch. Alternatively, you can destroy the enemy backline if they're running something quite squishy and immobile like an Ana Zen. Either engage with your seismic slam or your punch, and make sure you engage from a different angle in order to make yourself less telegraphed, looking to either hard engage and go in deep with the rest of your cooldowns, or doing a soft engage using your other mobility cooldown to escape. Junkerqueen is likely a top 3 tank right now, and is basically an alternative to Reinhardt or Ramattra. Look to utilize cover to save your commanding shout when you need it, almost like a failsafe, and for the love of God, please take your time when throwing your knives. They're basically hog hooks, and you can easily force some big cooldowns if you land your knife, or even land a kill. Also, make sure you pop your rampage in the mid-fight when there's fewer cooldowns to stop you. There's nothing worse than getting a 5-man rampage, and then it's cleansed by a Kiriko Suzu. Orisa is a tank not quite as offensive as Queen, but offers more defensive options. She's a very cyclical hero, meaning that against most compositions, you'll be looking to spear spin to engage, and your fortify to disengage, or to sustain your aggression. Anywhere in your cooldown cycle, you'll be fishing for javelin picks too. Generally speaking, you'll want to engage on the enemy backline if they're quite squishy, or you'll look to engage on the enemy tank if you can't access the enemy backline because they're too slippery or they're too mobile. The newest tank to Overwatch, Ramattra, is a fairly one-dimensional hero, being a hybrid of poke and brawl. This means at the beginning of fights, generally speaking, in Omnic form, you'll look to utilize the moderately high DPS from your Void Accelerator to soften up the enemy team, and then you'll look to close the distance and enter Nemesis form. Utilize your shield to soak up damage up close and to allow you to sustain yourself in Nemesis form, and use your Vortex to chase down and secure kills in that time period. Your ultimate, Annihilation, also gives you a bonus 225 armor even when you're in Nemesis form, and don't forget to utilize your block, especially when you don't have armor. Reinhardt is a low-range, moderate mobility tank who is unbeaten in close range. Utilize your typical Reinhardt mechanics like 5-striking around corners, 5-striking at corners, playing aggressive when you have armor, and having a full shield when you engage to beat the enemy Reinhardt and to charge your shatter quickly. And when you're not playing against the enemy Reinhardt, be creative with your pin. Use it to hunt down enemy flankers, destroy the enemy Winston when he dives your team, and to clear high ground so the enemy DPS can't get close. A tank that's not as good as Ryan, Roadhog, is in a bad place. My guide to play him is to not play him because you're gonna throw the game. He has a 28% win rate in GM, so don't bother. Thankfully, a tank that's a lot better than Hog is Sigma. He's a high damage, ranged duelist who can hold angles like no other hero in the game. Whilst there is one less tank in Overwatch 2, so you might be tempted to stack main, try and look for mid-fight rotations and angles that you can play as the teamfight devolves and becomes more messy. When you are standing down main to hold down space though, do try and look to land your hyperspheres onto backline squishies instead of going autopilot and shooting the enemy tank. Similar to D.Va, also make sure you mark and shot down aggressive threats on the enemy team with your shield as well. Winston's up next. Firstly, scout and set up your dive. To do this, just gain access to high ground to actually see the enemy team and listen to the sounds the enemy team are making to know what heroes to dive. Secondly, you'll be wanting to dive targets who are either easy to kill and or are dangerous, meaning you'll be avoiding tanks for the most part and looking for the isolated Zen or Ana in the backline, or that soldier in his visor, or that Sojourn with her overclock. And lastly, just get good with your primal mechanics, mainly juggling. A tank who also needs mechanics, being Wrecking Ball, has 3 main playstyles: to dive, duel, or disrupt. You'll be diving enemies if you have dive heroes on your team, like Tracer, and there's immobile, diveable heroes like Zen on the enemy team. You'll be dueling as well for key areas of the map, using your text to give you the edge. And lastly, you'll be disrupting the enemy team by capitalizing on opportunities where enemies are rotating, repositioning, or when you just can't dive or duel because the enemy team are running Cassidy May. And lastly, finishing off the tanks with Zarya. Your bubbles are by far the most important part of your kit, and don't just use them for charge. A good guideline for bubble usage is to bubble aggression, meaning bubbling your own aggression, the aggression of a teammate, or if you or a teammate are being aggressed on. You want to initially bubble to get decent energy, whilst also maintaining a bubble to maximize how aggressive you can play. Try and keep a bubble in the mid-fight to sustain yourself so you don't get run over. Keep in mind, the threat of bubble is what allows you to take space. If the enemy team know you haven't got any bubbles, they're gonna run you over. Now onto the DPS, starting with Ashe. Sightlines and angles are key to your character. Most of the time, you'll be taking longer sightlines, but against snipers, that's why you want to stay out of their LOS and look for shorter sightline angles onto their team. Look to dynamite squishies from off angles and time them for when your team can actually push. Bob enemy backlines and use your coach gun for mobility, either to get to high ground or to escape a dive threat. A hero that doesn't have too much mobility, Bastion, has two main playstyles, a brawlbuster or a flanker. Both playstyles are centered around the cycles of your turret form. The brawlbuster focuses on burning down the enemy tank, utilizing the sustain from your ironclads and armor in your turret form, and the flanker playstyle looks to find short to medium sightlines to blitz down enemy squishies, timed for when your team can actually engage. Use your nade for lethality or mobility, use your ultimate to secure kills early on or to zone space, and be aggressive with your turret form. A hero that I think is a lot better than Bastion this season, Cassidy, is great at holding medium range sightlines with his Peacekeeper, using his Magnate to threaten flankers like Genji or Tracer, as well as having a role he can use defensively. Against highly immobile comps with a ton of poke, don't be afraid to hard flank, but you should always be looking for soft flanks and angles you can take throughout the fight to surprise the enemy team. The worst thing you can do by far is to sit down main with your Peacekeeper. Echo is one of the most versatile heroes in the game in terms of playstyle because she's one of the few heroes in the game who have both range and mobility. Your 5 main playstyles are to duel, flank, dive, poke, or peel. When dueling and flanking, you'll look to utilize your burst damage and mobility to get on top of immobile, squishy heroes. When diving, you'll also be doing that, but more synchronized with your team. Poke when you outrange the enemy team, and you can also peel against something like a ball slam with your stickies and beam. A hero quite similar to Echo, Genji, is also a poke dive hybrid, having the flexibility to spam from off angles and flanks to farm his blade, as well as pouncing and dueling squishies with relative safety thanks to his insane burst damage and defensive cooldowns. Treat your deflect like a get out of jail free card, and ensure you have some kind of escape if you do decide to go for a duel. Ensure that you have full HP and cooldowns when you duel too. Also, try to engage from off angles and time your blades well. Even nano blades are subject to failing. Genji's brother Hanzo is up next. He's one of the few heroes in the game that can play both short and long ranges, and the only hero in the game who can one-shot from any range. His storm arrows allow him to take surgical, short to medium range angles, with his sonic arrow allowing him to scout the angle he takes. Use Dragon Strike to zone space, look to take aggressive angles with your lunge and or your wall climb to get the most out of your storm arrows, and play your appropriate ranges. Heading over to the land of the Aussies and friendly Geordies, Junkrat can provide a lot to your team if pulled off well. Gone are the days of mindlessly spamming down chokes as Junkrats. Nowadays, you lean heavily into the dueling or flanking playstyle, engaging from weird and quirky off angles to one-shot someone with your nade and mine combo. Alternatively, you can look to spam and control tight, narrow, short sightlined and enclosed areas of the map like Kings or Hotel. Threaten enemies in close range with your one-shot combo, time your tire in the mid-fight, and avoid the sightlines of heroes that outrange you. Mei is one of the best close-range duelists in the game, thanks to her high utility in her wall and the high sustain in her cryo. Your wall usage is all about isolating targets and aggressing onto them. This could be as simple and as classic as walling off the enemy Reinhardt and walking onto him, or walling off the enemy tank and then freezing the supports, or ice walling off the enemy DPS to get into close range and to duel them. Always look for those opportunities to take on the enemy squishies when possible, don't get greedy with your blizzards, and get creative with your positioning against the mobile, ranged comps where you might not get value from your wall. Pharah's playstyle in Overwatch 2 is actually pretty similar to Overwatch 1, in that you're either spamming around corners in the air, or you're pouncing onto enemy squishies with your concussion blast to get into range. Watch your fuel management, use your concussion blast to set up and make your dives easier, and time your barrage in the mid-fight when there's less cooldowns to stop you. Reaper is also another hero with two main playstyles, a frontline tank buster or a backline flanker. As the teamfight progresses, you'll have to make decisions on which playstyle to go for, and they could swap on a whim. In short, flank against the mobile, squishy backlines, and frontline against the more slippery backline, or if their tank is squishy, like a Zarya. Your cooldown cycles are also quite basic. either walking or teleporting in, pressuring with your shotguns, and then wraithing out. Try and look for short sideline flanks and rotations to make, flank and pressure where your team are fighting from, and the more aggressive your Blossom is, the later it needs to be timed. The newest DPS hero to be added to Overwatch 2, Sojourn, has a lot of power in a railgun. Either utilize your power slide defensively to quickly leave an aggressive position, or use it aggressively to reach juicy angles on flanks when you have a fully charged railgun. Whilst easy to throw away, do be sure to stack your disruptor shot with your team's aggression or your own. Keep in mind, Sojourn's advantage over her counterpart being Soldier is in her burst damage and burst mobility. Utilize that. Also, take time in your overclock, don't just spam out shots and miss every single one. Speaking of Soldier, he's up next. Soldier is played for his sprint and his consistent output and damage thanks to his biotic field. I've always described Soldier as a hybrid between the normal hit scan heroes like Cassidy and Ashe and the flankers like Tracer and Sombra. Your sprint gives you mobility to take deeper angles that heroes like Cassidy and Ashe can't take, with your biotic field allowing you to stay on that angle for longer. Keep your range against heroes like Sojourn and Cassidy, be disciplined with your corner usage, and track to the best of your ability. Next up is Sombra. She's a mid-range flanker with 3 key things you need to keep in mind. When are you pressuring, where are you pressuring from, and who are you pressuring? In terms of when, you need to time your pressure with your team, and in terms of where it's from, it needs to be with cover and usually with distance if you outrange your targets. But that's the thing, who is the target you'll be pressuring or hacking? In short, that comes down to range. Basically, if they outrange you, like a Widow, Zen, Ashe or Hanzo, that's who you're going to be focusing. But if they're running something like a Lúcio, Moira, Reaper or Tracer, then you'll be farming their tank. Symmetra is a highly versatile Pokeball hero who, in matchups like a Reinhardt mirror, can melt down the enemy tank by farming up her beam, whilst also having the flexibility thanks to her teleports to flank and split attention behind the enemy team. Depending on the comp and the map, look to either control enclosed spaces with your turrets, flank around and split focus in the mid-fights with TP bombs, or set up more defensive turret traps to catch enemies off guard. The third to last DPS here, Torb, is picked for his added sustain and chunkiness in comparison to his hitscan counterpart, Cassidy. If you can nail down the easier parts of his kit, being his turret and overload, then the biggest skill curve is with landing his shots consistently. If you don't, you'll struggle to keep up with the damage that heroes like Cassidy can output. Turret flanks or off angles, overload when dove, ult to zone space, and land those shots. A hero that Torb counters quite a bit, Tracer, is best at controlling flanks thanks to her incredible mobility and high damage as a flanker. Depending on composition, you may want to duel the enemy backline or discourage enemy squishies from taking angles, almost like a shepherd herding sheep back to its herds. Have good trigger discipline, use terrain and cover during your blinks, try and pulse bomb squishies, and time your engage as well. Now to the last DPS, Widowmaker. Now I know the Widow range nerf might make things difficult, but generally speaking, you should be playing long range, and that's just a given as a sniper. And your mechanics are important, that's an even more obvious given. But the difficulty in Widowmaker comes with timing and rotations, especially in sniper duels, and especially moving closer to avoid that fall off nerf. Don't peek angles too early, especially if they're aggressive, and try and stack as many advantages in your favour when taking a duel. Actually use your Venom Mine, SMG up close, and don't do a carefree Infocytes. Now onto the supports, beginning with Ana. You as Ana should usually be using your Sleep Dart defensively and your nade offensively, looking to move and rotate to angles in the mid-fight, to toss your nade aggressively and land those big purples. However, if you're against a full dive composition, your priority is survival. That means you're still moving and rotating in the mid-fight, but to places of cover and to where your team can actually help you. Baptiste obviously has his high utility in his immortality field, but make sure you're getting use out of your gun damage-wise too. Don't just heal bots. Look for different angles to take and rotate to, similar to Ana, with the help of your exo boots. With your ultimates, try and look to take the fight into your own hands and become a third DPS. Also, don't waste your region burst, it is a 10 meter radius, and toss your lamp around corners when your team are about to die. Brigitte. Thanks to Brig's newly founded burst healing in her repair packs, Brig is now the ultimate peel or protection supports. But not just for her other supports, but for her DPS too. Look to position yourself on off angles, not only to help your DPS, but to also threaten the angle yourself thanks to your bash and flail. Your new rally is also a lot more defensive too, but you can also still use it offensively to help take those angles. Pack squishies, play cover, and look to brawl in the mid-fights up close. Now to the best support in the game, Kiriko. You either duel, poke, or support. Against ranged compositions, look to duel the enemy snipers from close flanks when and where possible, two-tapping them, then teleporting back to your team when under pressure. With more brawly comps, so Reinhardt or Winston rush, look to support your team on small off angles, farming Kitsune rush by healing your tank, and poking when you can. Try your best to not heal bot when you can. Lifeweaver. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna cover him, he's still ass, even after these buffs. Lúcio. He has 3 main playstyles, being to red it, run it, or relieve it. In other words, you need to find ways to enable your team and to disable the enemy team. The Reddit playstyle looks to duel enemy squishies by their lonesome, disabling the enemy team. The Run It playstyle looks to utilize your speed to enable your own team, and the Relieve It playstyle looks to enable your DPS on off angles or to disable the enemy flankers. Someone who can also enable DPS is Mercy. The fundamental reason to why you play Mercy is your damage boost and mobility. Look to enable aggressive teammates regardless of them being tank, DPS or support, and don't just autopilot and pocket a single target. Make sure that when you're beaming, you look around in order to maintain awareness, and whilst you should obviously learn your fundamental techs, don't just spam them off cooldown. Use Valkyrie to enable your team's aggression, don't spam your Guardian Angel, and utilize cover. Now to the second to last supports, Moira. The TikTok Moira is a legit playstyle if done correctly, but your playstyle heavily depends on the type of composition you're up against and the one that you're playing. If your team doesn't require much healing and you see an isolated squishy who you could pounce on, that is where you can go TikTok. Alternatively, if your comp is suited for it and there isn't a chance to 1v1, leverage the insane amount of AoE healing that you can do. Also, don't waste your fade because you might need to use it to escape. And lastly, finishing off the video with Zenyatta. Orb your flankers and orb aggression as you normally would, but you need to keep moving and rotating with cover when you or the enemy team are aggressing. Be aware and keep your eyes peeled for flankers, because a single shot on a Tracer, Sombra or Genji can put a lot of pressure on them and easily force a cooldown or two. Be disciplined but flexible with your positioning, orb aggression, and always be aware of flank threats. Also, use your Transcendence fluidly. Don't hold on to it forever, waiting for the enemy team to drop 5 ultimates. And that's it for the video. Shout out to my channel members, Chris Jones, Craig, T-Meg, 9 Socks, and Lúcio, and let me know your thoughts down below. Until next time.